Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Batra. We are up to Perikei Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbayev Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Chana ben Miriam Sason ben Ryan Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam began Eden Amen and Avdil ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shachol Israel and Achlama Merav ben Amin Od Sion Chai ben Dvorah. The Mishnah continues to discuss the exact point at which a sale is completed, after which neither party can withdraw from the sale. The Mishnah speaks about a case where a person is buying a container full of a liquid such as wine or oil, and the seller is pouring the liquid into a borrowed container that belongs to a third party. If someone sells wine or oil to his friend, and as the goods are being poured into the borrowed container, their price went up or their price went down, so that one of the parties wants to withdraw from the sale. If the price goes up, the seller wishes to withdraw so he can sell at the higher price. And if the price drops, the buyer wishes to withdraw so he can buy at the cheaper price. The law is as follows. If the price changed before the container was filled completely, all of the wine or oil still belongs to the seller, and either party may withdraw from the sale. When two people making a sale borrow a container from a third party, it is considered to be loaned to the seller for measuring until the container is filled, and to the buyer to take his goods home once it is full. Therefore, if the container was not full, the buyer never acquired the goods. But if the price changed after the container was filled, the goods already belong to the buyer. Once the container is filled, the buyer automatically acquires the wine or oil and the sale is complete. The container is resting in a simta or in the buyer's property, and a buyer acquires goods when they are placed within his containers or containers that are loaned to him if the containers are resting in a property that he owns or is allowed to use. This is called kinyan kelav, acquisition to his containers. Since the container is loaned to the buyer once it is full, he automatically acquires the goods at that time, completing the sale. The Mishnah speaks about a case where the law is different. But if there was a broker between them, meaning if the container belongs to a broker who is buying the wine or oil from the seller and then selling it to the buyer, then if the barrel breaks after it is filled, it is broken for the broker. The broker intended to acquire the wine or oil for himself and then sell it to the buyer. It was therefore his when the barrel broke, and he must bear the loss, not the buyer. We do not say that the broker is considered an agent of the buyer and that the goods were therefore acquired by the buyer once the container has been filled. Rather, the broker has acquired the goods for himself, and if the barrel breaks, the loss is his. Some other laws that apply to the sale of liquids: the chayav latif lo shalosh tipin, and the seller must tip out 3 drops for him. If someone is selling the entire contents of a container, he must pour out the wine or oil into the buyer's container, and then let 3 more drops of the remains of the liquid drip into the buyer's container as well. Once he has given the buyer those 3 drops, if he then tilted the container on its side and more liquid collected, this leftover liquid belongs to the seller, since the buyer does not expect to receive every last drop. The buyer does not want to wait around until every last drop is drained into his container. He therefore gives up the rights to whatever drops remain in the seller's container, and the seller can keep them. But a shopkeeper who makes many sales one after the other does not have to tip out 3 drops for each buyer. Since he is busy with his many sales, we do not trouble him to do this. The Mishnah cites a Tana who limits the shopkeeper's exemption. Rabbi Yehuda says, Erev Shabbat im chashecha patur. On Friday, when it is close to evening, he is exempt because the Shabbat is near and he is very rushed. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it is only right before the Shabbat that a shopkeeper does not need to tip out the 3 drops, but at all other times, even a shopkeeper must tip out 3 drops for the buyer. And the Rav tells us, Ven Rabbi Yehuda, the Lacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is in a Mishnah Chet. Again, Mishnah Chet spoke of a case where a barrel broke during a sale. Mishnah Tet discusses another time when there was a mishap during a sale and cites a dispute as to who is responsible. Someone sent his young son to a shopkeeper with a pundion, a coin worth 2 isals, and an empty jug in his hand. The empty jug was sent to hold the oil that was being bought. Now it's clear from the continuation of the Mishnah that the boy had brought the jug along. The person wished to buy a jug full of oil for 1 isar and received the oil and 1 isar of change in return. The boy arrived at the store and gave the pundion and the jug to the shopkeeper. Umadad lo bi'isar shemen. The shopkeeper then took the jug from the boy and used it to measure oil for other customers. The seller therefore improperly borrowed the jug without permission, and then he measured out the oil for the boy and put it into the jug. V'natan lo et ha'isar, and gave him the filled jug and the isar of his father's change as well. Shavar et hatzlochit v'ibed et ha'isar. The boy then set off to return home, and on the way he accidentally broke the jug, losing the oil, and he lost the isar as well. Chenvani chayav. In this case, the law is that the shopkeeper is liable to pay for the oil, the isar, and the jug. He is liable to pay for the oil and the isar because he should not have sent them back with the child. The child was too young to be a responsible delivery boy. The first Tana therefore holds that the intention of the father in sending his son was only to notify the shopkeeper that he wanted to buy a jug full of oil and have the oil and an isar of change to be delivered to him by a responsible adult, not to offer his son as a delivery person. Since the seller should have realized this, he was irresponsible in sending the jug back with the child, and he must pay for the loss of the oil and the change. And the shopkeeper is liable for the jug because he borrowed it without permission. By rights, the shopkeeper should not be liable for the jug, as he can argue that when the father sent the jug with the young child in the first place, he should have realized that it was as good as broken. The reason he is liable is that he borrowed it without permission to measure for others. According to this Tana, doing this is the same as stealing the jug. And once he stole the jug, he is not allowed to return it by giving it to the child, but he must return it to the father directly. Since he gave it to the child instead, he is liable to pay for it if it is broken. The shopkeeper cannot argue that the buyer willingly threw away the pundion as well by giving it to the child, for in fact the shopkeeper received the pundion safely and still has it. He therefore is obligated to give its value, the oil and the change, to the buyer. Another Tana disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda poter, but Rabbi Yehuda exempts the shopkeeper from liability. She'al minat ken shelacho, because it was with this intention that the buyer sent the child in the first place. According to Rabbi Yehuda, by sending the money and jug to the shopkeeper with his son, the buyer showed that he wanted his son to bring back the oil and the change, so the shopkeeper is not responsible for any mishap that occurred. Rabbi Yehuda argues with the first Tana and holds that when a boy is sent to the store, it is with the intention that he himself should deliver the desired items and any change. Therefore, the shopkeeper did nothing wrong when he gave the oil and the change to the boy, and he is not liable for any loss. And even though Rabbi Yehuda agrees that the shopkeeper should not have borrowed the jug without permission, he holds that this does not make him responsible for the accident that happened later. According to Rabbi Yehuda, someone who borrows something without permission is not treated like a thief, but like a borrower, although he was wrong to borrow without permission. Therefore, once he returned it to the place from which he borrowed it, the boy's hands, he has fulfilled his obligation, and he is not liable for the jug if it gets broken afterward. Now the Mishnah notes that if the case had been a bit different, there would be no dispute. Modim chachamim Rabbi Yehuda, and the sages, meaning the first Tana, would agree with Rabbi Yehuda, bizman she'atzlochit biyad tinok, that if the jug was in the hand of the child when he arrived at the shop, umadad chenvani letocha, and the shopkeeper measured the oil out for him into the jug immediately without using it for anyone else first. Chenvani patur, that the shopkeeper is exempt from liability for the jug if the boy breaks it later because he did not borrow the jug without permission. Even if the shopkeeper took it out of the child's hands before putting it in the oil, he is exempt as long as he did not use it for anyone else. According to the sages, though, he would still be liable for the oil and the change because he should not have sent them back with the boy. And the Rav does tell us, Venachak Rabbi Yehuda, the Rav does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And that is an Abutai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.